What's up everybody, this is Master Ian Gamer. Amidst all the excitement for the new heroes, maps, and game modes which will be coming in Overwatch 2, one aspect of the sequel that has been on my mind since its announcement is the different factions we'll be encountering within the new PvE story and hero missions. Blizzard has already confirmed a couple of them and acknowledged that more are on the way. So in this video, I want to take a look at which new factions we're likely to see in Overwatch 2's PvE and what sort of different enemy types might end up being tied to them. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off, let's take a look at the two already confirmed enemy factions, being Talon and Null Sector. Both of these are ones which we've faced off against in the Overwatch 1 Archives missions, but as seen in the 2019 BlizzCon demo for Overwatch 2, they'll be undergoing some substantial changes from what we've previously encountered. Null Sector, which was the opponent in the Rio mission, featured an entirely redesigned cast of enemy units. Some of them bore functional resemblance to the ones from Uprising, but most were brand new in the way they moved, shot, and engaged the player. On top of that, the Null Sector concept art shown off at BlizzCon also hints at several more enemy types that weren't even present in the playable demo. So if these new robo-wizards and other enemies are anything to go by, then we can expect some radically improved and redesigned PvE opposition. And that goes for Talon as well. By comparison, we only saw visually redesigned versions of existing Talon units in the trailer and concept art, and didn't get to see if they were functionally different from their counterparts in Retribution and Storm Rising, since they weren't actually in the playable demo. However, if the aforementioned Null Sector artwork is anything to go off of, then we can most likely expect Talon to adopt a number of new recruits as well. Hopefully, these will introduce more gameplay variety than just Bronze Tier Widowmaker, Speedy McScreams-a-Lot, and Uncle Bullet Sponge, but if the Null Sector units we've seen thus far are anything to go by, then we're likely going to be in luck. However, what about the other factions we'll end up facing against in Overwatch 2? With so many established groups and organizations within the game's universe, which ones would work best as opposition to the newly reformed Overwatch? One of the more interesting factions to introduce would be the Shimada Clan. They're certainly one of the more subtle of the known factions, with most of what we know about them coming from Hanzo and Genji's origin stories, and outside of the clumsy goons we see defending Hanamura in the Dragons animated short, we haven't seen much of their militant manpower, but we do have some details regarding what all this clan may have up their sleeves. As stated in Hanzo's official bio, the Shimada Clan is a very old clan of assassins who have profited over the years through the trade of arms and illegal substances. Furthermore, Hanzo acknowledges in the animated short that said assassins have been continuously sent after him ever since his abandonment of the clan. Therefore, we can reason that the Shimada Clan is quite literally a group of Yakuza ninjas, and if that's not the perfect kind of opposition for Overwatch to fight against in a PvE mission, then I don't know what is. Their specific unit types are already pretty evident. You got the basic Yakuza goon foot soldiers who make up the bulk of the faction, and with their history of being skilled assassins, their special units would likely be based on ninjas who utilize different stealth or hit and run tactics. In this regard, they'd likely share much with the existing Talon assassin unit, but possibly feature a few different variants, each with their own abilities and varying threat levels. And assuming that Blizzard wants to keep with the traditional Japanese theme for this faction, which, if they know even the basics of good marketing, they will, the bulkier tank units of their group could be some kind of melee-based samurai warriors. This could either be a dude in a power suit like Talon's Heavy Assault, or even just a straight-up beefy Omnic, as we've already seen that the Shimada Clan has no opposition to employing Omnics in their ranks. I'm sure you can see how taking a traditionally inspired Japanese clan like this offers a ton of interesting potential with different PvE style enemies. But moving on from the Shimada Clan, another prime enemy faction for Overwatch to fight against is Los Muertos. So far, we've seen this group front and center in Soldier 76's hero animated short, and if you look past the fact that a dozen armed youths couldn't take down a single old man, they do seem to possess some reasonable combat prowess. In a story sense, they have direct ties to Soldier 76, Sombra, and the Dorado map, and could easily be utilized as a sort of group of pawns by bigger players like Talon. So, like the Shimada Clan, Los Muertos feels like a perfect enemy for both the canon story missions, as well as the non-canon hero missions. I could possibly see the fact that they are largely a group of wayward ruffians being a bit of an impasse, as I'm not sure everyone would like the idea of us slaughtering a gang of local punks en masse, but I'm sure Blizzard can work in some way to justifiably allow it. After all, we do see that they are up to some sort of illegal arms dealing, so that's probably good enough. Besides, Soldier disposes of them with extreme prejudice in the animated short, so why not let the actual players get in on the fun too? As for their unit types, the fluorescent punks would obviously be the basic foot soldiers, but the special units among them are a bit harder to pin down. Seeing how Sombra was originally a member of Los Muertos prior to getting involved with Talon, the faction may have other talented hackers in their ranks. Some of their PvE special units then might be able to hack or otherwise disable the player in different ways, or even hack their own allies in order to empower them. I also love the idea of them using vehicles to some extent, like the Dorado truck. Maybe this could serve as a sort of heavy boss unit, where a high health truck rolls in with a minigun mounted on it, and you have to take out everyone on board in order to destroy it. Based on the established details of the faction, they at the very least seem to have a lot of weapons and a lot of manpower, so whatever their exact units end up being, I imagine they'll be largely based around these aspects. Another likely PvE faction, though, is the Junkers. They're perhaps the most well-established of the speculated groups I've mentioned thus far, and they are directly tied to 3 of the current hero roster members, with a 4th anticipated for the hopefully not-too-distant future. We know a fair bit about their origins, disposition, and society, with many key details that could come into play as a PvE enemy faction. They are brutal, rambunctious, and just can't get enough of gladiatorial mech battles. Like Los Muertos, though, I could see some opposition to treating the Junkers as just faceless goons to be mowed down indiscriminately. After all, many of the residents of Junkertown are shown to be decent people, or at the very least not evil, with the main notable exceptions being the Junker Queen and her enforcers. These individuals are shown to be exceptionally rude and violent, thus removing much of the sympathy one might have when taking them out. Therefore, in the story sense, the Junker faction will likely be justified as PvE enemies by focusing on the idea of Overwatch only fighting the Queen and her armed henchmen, rather than every irradiated bumpkin who happens to live in Junkertown. The real potential with the Junker faction, however, is their enemy types. Their foot soldiers could be random crazy wastelanders who perhaps use melee weapons as their default attacks. Medium threat level units could then have any number of Mad Max inspired ranged weapons, such as crossbows or even flamethrowers. And then of course the big bad boss units will be Junker mechs. With the scrapyard and mech battles being a central part of Junkertown's culture, there could easily be several different mech variants which the player faces off against in PvE missions. Some might have buzzsaws, others flamethrowers, flails, grenade launchers, grabby arms, you name it. Another unit type could be some sort of charismatic war crier, similar to what we hear from the Queen herself over the Junkertown loudspeakers. These Junker supports could literally shout to empower and heal their allies, much like what I designed in my hero concept video for the Junker Queen. There's tons of potential for the Junkers, which is why I'd rule them as one of the more likely factions to make it into Overwatch 2's PvE. But moving now onto a few more quick rapid-fire faction possibilities, another group to consider is the Kishin Omnics. Little is known about this Omnic group in particular, other than that they're the main threat facing South Korea and Mecha Squad, so their actual threat level on a global scale is largely unknown. While the few designs we've seen of them seem to have some notable visual similarities to the Overwatch 2 Null Sector units, minus the, tentacles, it's unknown whether or not these two Omnic groups are in any way actually connected. Both seem to stem from the original anti-human forces following the end of the Omnic crisis, but it's tough to say whether these distant cousins have been keeping in touch over the years. If I had to hazard a guess, I would say that Blizzard will likely merge the two factions into just Null Sector if they do plan on continuing with the Kishin units, as it'd be simpler to design and also would likely make sense from a story perspective. The enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of thing, in addition to the fact that they're, well, all human-hating Omnics. Another quick faction to take note of, though, is the Deadlock Gang. Like the Shimada Clan in Los Muertos, we know that the Deadlock Gang deals in illegal arms and a lot of other criminal activity. So the threat level is certainly there for Overwatch to potentially be called in to deal with them, but the hazy details regarding how many of them actually exist makes me a bit skeptical about their viability. Despite the roster having 2 heroes directly tied to this group, we don't have a good understanding of exactly how big they are in terms of manpower. We only know of about half a dozen specific members, with story details hinting at the existence of at least a few others, but it's tough to say whether or not there'd actually be enough of them to work as a PvE faction. This is one group where I could potentially see Blizzard just shoehorning in some reason for their numbers to skyrocket, and their inclusion will likely be most dependent on just how many factions Blizzard wants to cram into Overwatch 2, and whether or not they think that the Deadlock Gang is a good fit. But another quick likely faction I want to touch on is Helix Securities. This private security firm has shown up surprisingly frequently across the Overwatch story. They're Pharah's employer, they currently defend the Anubis God program, they ran the maximum security prison that held Doomfist, and regarding Watchpoint Grand Mesa when Soldier 76 stole his pulse rifle from there. While they are mostly suggested as being a benevolent, albeit slightly inept faction, Mercy alludes in her short story to the fact that they might not be quite as good as they seem. If they really are functionally just a group of mercenaries, as she suggests, then that puts them at basically the same level as Talon back in the days when Baptiste was a part of them, and could be foreshadowing Helix's imminent fall from grace. If this is the case, then they could easily end up being a faction which Overwatch faces off against, as the illegal nature of the newly reformed group of heroes means that Helix might be tasked with combating them anyways. At this point, it's tough to say how exactly they'll come into play in the PvE missions of Overwatch 2, but Helix Securities is definitely a faction to keep an eye on as time goes on. And last but not least, the final PvE enemy faction I want to take a look at for today is Moon Apes. Wait, no, that isn't right. Or is it? I'll put a pin in that one. The real last faction, though, is Overwatch itself. That's right, the very protagonists we love and adore would make for excellent enemies when playing as the enemies. If there's one thing that's imperative to making the PvE of Overwatch 2 great, it's that we need to have story missions for characters other than those directly in Overwatch. The most obvious group for this is, of course, Talon. While Talon could very well be facing off against any number of different peacekeeping factions, for example, rather than seeing Helix turn evil, we might just see them as one of the opponents faced when playing Talon missions, but nothing would be as fitting as for them to get to directly combat their longtime enemy, Overwatch. This could reasonably be done by saying that Overwatch, after having reformed, is adopting a number of new nameless, faceless agents beyond those which are playable in the PvP. These basic units could make for easy fodder in a Talon-based mission without actually killing any of the important story characters. This would likely be the most controversial PvE faction of all, however, given that the whole point of Overwatch as a game is to emphasize how the world needs Overwatch in order to maintain peace. But come on, Blizzard, if you don't let us play the villains, then you're missing out on massive potential from both story and gameplay perspectives. Don't disappoint us by being too goody two-shoes to allow a little bit of darkness in your already quite violent game. I do for sure think that we're likely to get Talon story missions in Overwatch 2, and so the question really is whether we'll actually get to fight against Overwatch, or if Blizzard will chicken out and just have us shooting Helix Security Omnics. But with that, these have been my ideas and predictions for which additional factions we're going to be seeing in Overwatch 2's PvE. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these different groups and what sort of enemy unit types they might feature, so be sure to leave any ideas of your own down in the comments below. As always, be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video and share it with a friend if you really liked it. Subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and hit up the bell to never miss any of my future Overwatch content. This is Master EN Gamer signing off, and until next time, have a great day.